Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for being here. I know that it's not easy to get out this early in the morning, especially going to work. And with the rain, it's like they say with voting, that whenever it's a rainy day, no one shows up to poll. So you're all here. You're here to talk about poetry. And I love what Sophia said about, people putting poetry on a pedestal, but that is not what we're here for. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm really trying to make sure that you see, poetry as a very accessible tool, and I'll tell you in a second why I hesitate to even use the word tool, that you can use in your everyday life. So to start, I'll give a little background on the Napkin Poetry Review. So our website tagline is, "We are an organization that brings poetry to light in untraditional spaces." And that is a fancy way of saying we like to use poetry as a way to bring communities together, and that's what we're doing here today. I did my first Creative Mornings talk in 2021, I believe, and it was over Zoom, and for a Zoom, it was a really great energy, and that's not easy to do, so that just speaks to Creative Mornings in general, but being here with everyone today is a completely different experience, so I hope everyone's really relaxed. We'll write a little at the end, very low stakes. You can crumple it up and throw it out, or you can hang it on your fridge or send it to your mom. It doesn't matter, but in any way, it's yours to keep. So to start with what this talk is about, actually no, I'm going to backtrack one more second just to go back to that idea of bridging communities. And when my co-founder and I, Anna Seidel, started the Napkin Poetry Review, we were coming in and we were doing our creative writing masters from a background in sciences and finance. And we loved what we were doing in the arts, but we did really feel like arts and sciences were super siloed. There wasn't really a lot of space for these disciplines to come together and talk. So we're chatting, we're doing our coffee shop meetups, and it started to dawn on us that there was all this research out there, this cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, those buzzwords today, but people doing things in neuroscience, linguistics, and just figuring out how does poetry affect our brains differently from other forms of language. And again, even this is some fancy ways of saying, how does poetry represent who we are as humans? The same way that science is another way of figuring out who we are as people. So for the title, Change Your Mind Through Poetry, whenever I create these talks, they have things like sharpen your mind through poetry or strengthen your business through poetry. We're very ROI and KPI and all the little acronym focus nowadays. And that's important to create entry points. We want to bring people into poetry who might not have originally been introduced to it. But I had this one professor, Claire Morgan, and she wrote this book called What Does Poetry Bring to Business? And she actually came here from England to the Boston Consulting Group, and she's in this room with all these buttoned up CEO suit type people, and she's telling them poetry is gonna really help them negotiate, and it's gonna be this common ground where everyone can come together, and how great is that going to be for your business objectives? But that's not really what happened when she brought them together to read a poem, and it was W.H. Auden's Funeral Blues, which some of you might know from 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, and by the end of that poem, these suited up CEO business types were in tears. So it just speaks to, yes, there are some tools that we're going to talk about and some interesting aspects of poetry, but at the end of the day, like any art, it's based on something ineffable, and that's the beautiful thing, what we can't quite capture in art, that awkward, messy humanness that we're all trying to interact with. And to go really far back to the basics, I want to start by defining a poem. So what is a poem? And I like this definition by Dana Gioia, who is a literary critic, poet, and used to be the VP at General Foods, so has some background in business. And he defines poetry as a special way of writing or speaking that invites a special way of reading or listening. So what does this mean? If I looked up into the sky and I'm just chatting, and I just start going, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk 100 miles on your knees through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Without me holding up a sign and saying, that's a poem, everyone, it'd probably go off in your head. And so this definition encompasses the many types of poetry there are. There's rap, spoken word, limericks, shape poetry, formal, free verse, And so I think that this kind of encapsulates all of them to an extent. And what's really cool about poetry that some people don't realize is its roots go way back for us. It was actually our first form of oral storytelling. So when we were trying to pass down the stories that would shape our society for generations, or, I mean, I don't know what they talked about back then. Maybe it was just telling someone, hey, there's a cool patch of berries over there, some antelope, go forth, but like we said it in rhyme. The reason that poetry came about is because when you rhyme things, when you use meter, when you use all those poetic devices that you learn in school, they actually help you memorize things. You know, think mnemonics in school, or for magic, incantations, rain, rain, go away, come again another day. Poetry's helping us memorize things. And little bits like this, you know, we want to have practical takeaways for you in this workshop. And something like that is a reminder. If you're giving a speech, for example, Steve Jobs was really into poetry. William Blake, you know, tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. And one of the reasons people think that he was such a good public speaker and really able to resonate with people was because he was bringing rhetorical devices from poetry into his work. So that's just a side note for you to keep in the back of your mind. And this quote from Vladimir Nabokov, "The wise reader reads the book of genius, not with his heart, not so much with his brain, but with his spine," links to poetry's connection on our brain, where it turns out, based on some research that was done by scientists such as Eugene Wasilewski, that our brains react to poetry before we even understand what is being said. It's the same with music, poetry and music. So if you hear a poem, you might think, well, this is some highfalutin nonsense. I don't know what this means. What is it? Your brain is actually registering this, and sometimes even emotionally, the way that you do with music, before you have any idea what's going on. So that just touches on, again, our deep intrinsic connection to poetry that we can really tap into. And another interesting thing that Eugene's research found is, it was research on chills, which is, in fancy science words, horripilation. I just like that word, horripilation. And he's trying to figure out what is the exact moment in a poem, in a song, when we get those chills of like, oh my goodness, something is moving me, something is changing. And it's not that moment when things are really happy. It's not that moment when things are really sad. It's when there's a mix of what Friedrich Schiller calls a mixed sentiment of suffering and pleasure. And at that moment, you know, they were able to track before the part of the brain that would process what these words actually mean was, you know, lighting up, or I guess whatever the neuroscientific terms they might properly use on the MRI. The emotional parts of the brain were responding. So people, and that was exactly the moment when the chills started, when people were really starting to feel something from this work. So once again, that's another thing to keep in the back of your mind for later when we go to the poems, that if you want to move people, don't give them happy, don't just give them sad, give them both and give them that little bit of life. And what we're here to talk about today, first and foremost, is how poetry can help us navigate ambiguity. So think of a moment in your own life where you don't really know what's going on. There's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and there's a lot of emotions, and research shows that it's those uncomfortable emotions, those neither nor emotions that upset us a lot more than just saying something is bad. When I can say something is bad and I can separate it from myself, okay, I know not to go over there. I know fire is bad. I'm great, cool, not touching it. But if there's that friend, you know, where I'm like, hot one day, cold another day, I don't know, I'm here, I'm there, that's going to be the thing that upsets me. And poetry can really help us deal with those uncertain spaces. So part of this goes to poetry's effect on the corpus callosum. So we're going to have another little science moment here. The corpus callosum is the part of the brain that connects the left and right hemispheres. And I will say, it's a bit of a myth. You know, the left-brained person is the rational, scientific, and the right-brained person is the creative. It really, you know, all the brains doing all the stuff. There might be a preponderance on one side or the other. But the more interconnectedness you have between your brain sections, the smarter you're going to be, the better decisions you're going to make, the better you're going to comprehend things. And research shows that engaging in music and poetry strengthens this part of your brain in development. You know, think about those babies in the belly listening to Mozart or whatever it is people do now. And Einstein, who was also a poet and a musician, he's really well known for being a violinist. A lot of researchers believe that some of, you know, his training from growing up was one of the reasons that allowed him to be so dexterous between all these different ideas and, you know, balancing the emotions with the reason, with the feeling, with, again, the humanness. And another interesting piece of research that's been done was by linguist Phil Davis. And he's out of the UK, and he was also trying to figure out, in a slightly less clinical way to Eugen, what is it about poetry that changes the way we think? Why are poems different from, you know, say, prose? And he identified what he calls a functional shift. So one cool thing about poetry, and this is one of my favorite ways to tell you can take it off the pedestal, you really don't need proper grammar. You don't need anything. You can make things up as much as you want. And if anybody asks you, say it's a poem. This is a poem, and they can't really say anything after that. That's it. And he was watching people's brains through, you know, he put electrodes on there. He was tracking electrical activity, and they were reading King Lear by Shakespeare, a riveting work. I mean, I'm sure it's very beautiful, but you know, not everyone's cup of tea. And even still, when people came across the word madded, that's M-A-D-D-E-D, like I was madded, I became mad. People, their brains just went, whoop. Okay, what's going on? Madded, that was not made mad, that was not I am, it is madded. And we're really sensitive to changes in the language. We know it a lot better than we think we do. And so when something's a little bit different, and that's what, you know, you do in poetry, you have the alliteration, the rhyme, and all of a sudden you throw a little wrench in there, people pause. And it actually activates the executive functioning network of the brain that says, okay, we gotta notice what's going on, we gotta figure this out. And ideally, if you're paying more attention to something, you can also make more meaning out of it. And you know, I think making meaning as humans is one of the most human things about us. I think it really, you know, the fact that we can take an apple plus a sewing machine and say, okay, well, I'm going to turn this into something new, and I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to mean something to me. And so anyway, he found this with these words in poetry, and that's another little takeaway I want everyone to have, that if you want to really make people pay attention to your work, throw in something a little strange. I mean, I'm not going to encourage breaking grammar rules, but maybe you could go for it. And this is one of the quotes from Phil Davis. People are getting out of their usual pathways and being jolted into something that makes them feel more alive inside. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to keep in the back of our minds, because isn't that the goal of art, to help people feel more alive? All right, and so why is it so bad, though, to just know that fire is bad, keep it out there, not deal with ambiguity, create our little boxes? It turns out there is a really good evolutionary reason why we do this, why we like distinct categories. And in psychology, there's a term called schemata, or schema to be used singularly, and it's mental categories unconsciously linked to specific emotions. So if I know a polar bear is really bad, and I'm like, okay, not gonna mess with polar bears, I have this category for bears. And when I see a black bear, even if I've never seen a black bear before, chances are I'm not going to go up and like try to pet it. I'm gonna say bear, and I'm gonna, I don't know, what do you like, raise my arms and back away or fall to the ground. I really hope I never see a bear, because I cannot remember what I'm supposed to do. But you would know not to mess with a bear, and it would protect you and keep you safe. The problem is, few things are that black and white. So, imagine you have a relationship, and I'm going to use a really basic example. I think it usually goes a little more deeper than this for my own life. When I was in undergrad, the only D1 sport at my college was lacrosse. So these lacrosse guys, they had some toot. They were going around the campus, they're the only athletic people there, they really think they're something. And my partner now is a lacrosse player. So I had to definitely, in the back, had to break myself out of that one a little bit and remember that there's especially the things that hurt us or the people that hurt us, chances are the reason we were drawn to those situations or those experiences in the first place was because there's also something good. There was something we wanted out of that. There was a feeling. And so when we discount an entire category of things, we might be missing out on some of the best and most valuable experiences of our life. We're also going to be kind of uncomfortable, and that is called cognitive dissonance. The state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions or attitude change. Very guilty of that. Speaking of intentions, all those intentions you set in the beginning of the year and you think, this is right, I know this, I got this, and then you're breaking it the next day. So what is going on there? And this is supernatural, and it's not supernatural like, UFO, just very, very natural of us. And it's also not something to feel any shame about. So one way to ease cognitive dissonance is to expect it and to embrace it, to make room for those both ands, and to know that pretty much everyone is going to set their best intentions and want to do their best work, and also be human, and also have certain desires, and also seek pleasure even when it might not be good for you, but that's okay. And anticipating that and in making room for those both ands is one of the things that poetry is awesome at. So one thing that I love about poetry is another thing with kind of in line with that grammar point. You can just put ideas back to back to back. You do not need therefore, you do not need however. You can just squish it all in like this little imagination box, and people are drawing connections wherever they want to, and it is fun and fancy free as far as art forms go. So you can put all of that mess in there. You can have the both, the ands, the neither nors. In some ways it's a lot like what they try to do in CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. One trick is to replace your buts with ands. So I love my boyfriend, but sometimes I miss having my own space. Well, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, the second you hear but, disregard everything that came before this. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, where did the love go? I'm just left with this thing that I don't like. What about you change that to, I love my boyfriend and sometimes I miss having my own space. So poetry, with its commas, with its enjambments, it allows you to do all of that in one little box, or long, I don't know, Jabberwocky's pretty long, I think. So what we're gonna do in this workshop is bring some of these tools into the page. And again, like I said, it's very low stakes. I want this to be fun. I want this to be really, open-ended. Let's see. Do people want to do questions first or dive into writing? Just in case anyone has any questions here. I'll do questions after? Okay. So I don't want to send you into anything without giving you an example, and I think that this is one of the best examples on the internet of a poem that does a little bit of it all. And it actually went viral, which is so rare for a poet. Maggie Smith was catapulted into poet fame, which, it's poet fame, let's be honest, but it's still pretty cool, and you'll see why when you read this poem. All right, and I'm gonna do a little reading for you. So, Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Life is short, though I keep this for my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep for my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this for my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible. And for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I am trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor walking through a real shithole chirps on about the good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. And that poem, I get chills every time I read it, speaking of chills. And she's literally talking about the both ands by percentage, 50%, 50, half and half. And so for our workshop today, what I would love to do is guide you through writing a poem that is the good thing and the bad thing. So what I encourage you all to think about, going back to Friedrich Schiller's idea of a mixed sentiment of suffering and pleasure, what makes you uncomfortable? What is maybe a little bit heavy for you this morning that, you every time you think of it, you think, okay, not right now, let's save this thought for later. Maybe it's a relationship with a family member that's, just a little bit uncomfortable. They're in your life, one foot in, one foot out. Maybe it's your relationship with yourself or with your goals, and you love yourself and there's so many things that you want to do, and yet, we're not going to say but, and yet there's also a lot of fear. So what we're going to do, just to break it down and make it a little simple, we're going to use an XT chart. So on one side, no poetry yet, just a T-chart. We're going to have the positive thoughts, feelings, images on one side, lists of negative thoughts, feelings, images on the other side. So it can be absolutely anything. It can be details. It can be like, this thing is red, and I really just don't like the color red, not my color. It can be something more personal than that, sentences, bullet points. But yeah, just take, Sophia, how long would you do, like 3 minutes, 2 minutes? Yeah, 3 minutes, just freestyle a little bit. It's just about getting the words on paper in some compact way. So you're going to take this list of positives and this list of negatives, and in whatever way you see fit, bring them into one place. You don't have to explain anything away. You can make the final note a resounding positive line, which, good way to start your day, not knocking that. Or you can have it end on a note of sadness and just sit with the heaviness you might be feeling. And if you're wondering where to start, a really good place is to start with the details. Start with the smallest thing. One of my favorite parts of poetry is, I think it was Aristotle that said, the world lives in details. I'm definitely valorizing that quote, but it's something along those lines. And when you start with one tiny thing, how can that expand? It can be, today I walked here and go from there. So we're gonna take just 5 minutes, and these are notes you can keep with you for the rest of the day. Again, there's a trash can right there if you're like, I never want to see this again, don't want anyone to see this again. Or you can keep it in your pocket and have it as something to know that you sat with the uncomfortable emotions today. So we'll take 5 and go from there. So I hope I didn't cut anyone too short, but I also hope that you got some time to work with this, reflect on it, and again, you can carry it with you for the rest of the day. And here's just a few little, poetry tools if you want to make this more part of your regular practice. So one of my favorite newsletters is Poem a Day. It's exactly what it sounds like. You get a poem a day in your inbox and it's awesome. So subscribe there, memorize some favorite poems to improve your memory or rhetoric. It sounds kind of lame, but I don't know. I feel like there's always that moment at a party where it's just like, oh, just dropped a couple lines of poetry right there, me. And, read your poems to ease your mind on tense days. I know that Maggie Smith Good Bones poem is one that I go back to again and again and again. Same with Mary Oliver's Wild Geese. That's another one if anyone's just looking for a great starting point new to poetry. And professionally, if you're like, I'm really feeling this and I want people in my workplace to know about this, I want my friends to know about this, have a poetry workshop. So I mentioned at the Boston Consulting Group, they were using poetry as a way to facilitate empathy within teams. And it did show that after doing a poetry workshop together, they saw each other's humanness, they were reminded of it, and they were able to speak as humans instead of, business robots. And if you're stuck on a business problem, organizational problem, try an exercise like this. And I don't know if you guys know the Artist's Way. I feel like this is a group that I have tried and failed to do the Artist's Way consistently so many times, but in theory it's very inspiring. And what you do to clear your mind every morning is just 3 pages of free writing. Mine were usually like 1.5 generous, but the idea is that if you just keep going and going, even if you're writing, I don't know what to say, I don't know what, eventually, whatever you're really thinking that might be blocking you will be unearthed. And I think that poetry can work in a similar way to that, just really regurgitating and massaging all these words and feelings. So thank you so much for your time again on a rainy morning. It's a Friday. I'm sure everyone has very wonderful plans for the weekend. And here is some contact information. If anyone has any questions right now, I'm very open to it. And if people don't want to talk out loud or just have something that comes up later, here's some ways to contact. So thank you.